It was never meant to be remembered, not because it failed, but because it worked too well. Somewhere in the shadows of modern history, a weapon was created. A weapon so powerful that its own creators tried to erase it. No museum displays it. No textbook explains it. And no government openly admits it ever existed. What remains are fragments, whispers, redacted pages, and one unsettling question. What kind of weapon is too dangerous to survive history itself? To understand the answer, we have to go back to a time when power meant survival, when secrecy meant control. The world was divided, borders hardened, alliances formed in silence. Nations were no longer racing for land. They were racing for dominance. Scientists became soldiers. Laboratories became battlegrounds. Equations became weapons. And ideas were more dangerous than armies. This was the age of classified thinking. Entire projects buried beneath codenames. Funded without public record. Tested far from civilization. One such project began with a theory. A question asked quietly, behind locked doors. What if a weapon didn't just destroy targets? What if it erased consequences? At first, the designs looked unimpressive. No fireballs. No shockwaves. No dramatic explosions. Just math. And theory. But buried deep in those calculations was something terrifying. A mechanism that didn't break the rules of physics. It bypassed them. Early simulations shocked everyone involved. The weapon didn't scale like anything before it. Power didn't increase gradually. It multiplied. And once a certain threshold was crossed, there was no off switch. Engineers argued it was only theoretical, that real-world conditions would limit it, that safeguards could be added later. But military leadership saw something else. An advantage that could never be matched. A weapon that wouldn't just win wars, but end them permanently. Approval came quickly. Too quickly. Construction began under absolute secrecy. An isolated facility was built far from cities, buried deep underground. Only a handful of people knew what they were building. Even fewer understood what it could become. Because this weapon wasn't designed to destroy armies. It wasn't designed to level cities. It wasn't designed to send a message. It was designed to remove the possibility of resistance, to rewrite the rules of conflict itself. And once it existed, there was no guarantee it could ever be controlled. That realization came too late, because by the time doubt surfaced, the weapon was already real. And history was about to encounter something it was never meant to remember. In the next part, the weapon is tested. And the result forces a decision that will erase it from the world forever. The test was scheduled, without ceremony. No announcement. No countdown broadcast to the world. Just a date, a location, and a small group of people who understood that failure was not an option. The site was chosen for isolation. Thousands of miles from the nearest city. Far from shipping lanes. Far from flight paths. A place where mistakes could disappear. The weapon itself didn't look dangerous. No towering structure. No glowing core. No visible threat. It sat silent. Contained. Almost unremarkable. That should have been the first warning. Because the most dangerous systems rarely look powerful. They look inevitable. Final checks were completed in silence. Sensors calibrated. Redundant systems armed. Failsafes tested again and again. Every model predicted success. Every simulation said the same thing. Controlled activation. Localized effect. Zero collateral damage. On paper, it was perfect. The order was given. Activation began. At first, nothing happened. No sound. No movement. No visible change at all. Some thought the system had failed. Others watched their instruments in confusion. Then the readings started to drift. Not spike. Drift. As if reality itself was losing alignment. Time stamps desynchronized. Distances measured differently, depending on the sensor. Energy values appeared where none should exist. Then vanished. The operators tried to shut it down. The command was sent. Nothing happened. They tried again. Still nothing. The weapon wasn't ignoring them. It was no longer listening. Outside the facility, the environment began to change. Not violently, subtly. The air pressure dropped, then stabilized. Gravity fluctuated by fractions of a percent. Enough to be measured, enough to be felt. Animals fled the area in silence. Communication satellites experienced brief signal loss for exactly the same duration, across multiple orbits. That was when panic set in. Because coincidence had left the room. The weapon wasn't releasing energy. It was redistributing it, not outward, but inward, folding influence back onto itself. The system had crossed the threshold. The one engineers warned about. The one simulations couldn't fully model. The moment where scale stopped mattering. Where containment became theoretical. Inside the control room, alarms finally sounded. Not because limits were exceeded, but because limits no longer applied. The weapon had achieved a stable state, a self-sustaining condition. It no longer required input. It no longer required control. It simply existed. And its existence was the problem. Emergency protocols were activated. Destruction was considered. Rejected. There was no guarantee it wouldn't trigger a larger event. Extraction was impossible. Deactivation had failed. For the first time since the project began, no one spoke. Because the truth was clear. The weapon had worked. Better than anyone imagined. And that made it unusable. Not because it was unstable, but because it was permanent. If deployed, it wouldn't end a battle. It would erase the concept of escalation, of deterrence, of balance. One activation would rewrite the rules for everyone. Forever. The decision came quietly, unanimously. The weapon could never be used. And more importantly, it could never be known. In the next part, the world reacts to a weapon it will never see. And the lengths taken to make sure it stays lost. The shutdown never made the news. No alerts were sent. No emergency meetings were televised. To the outside world, nothing had happened at all. That was the first step in making sure it stayed that way. The facility was sealed. Not abandoned. Not destroyed. Simply closed. Buried under layers of authorization, denial, and time. Official records described the project as a failure. A dead end. A misallocation of resources. Budgets were reassigned. Personnel were scattered across unrelated programs, each given a different version of the truth. No single person was allowed to see the whole picture again. The weapon itself was left untouched. Not dismantled. Not deactivated. Just isolated. Locked in a state that no one fully understood. Because altering it risked changing something far larger than intended. From that moment on, the real work began. Erasing it. Mentions of the project vanished from archives. Digital records were overwritten. Paper trails were classified, then lost, then quietly destroyed. Even the code name was retired. Scrubbed from internal databases as if it had never been spoken. But erasing information is harder than erasing objects. People remember. And some of them talked. Not openly. Not clearly. Just enough to leave traces. Unusual sensor readings. Unexplained satellite anomalies. Environmental data that didn't quite match known events. Dismissed as glitches. Calibration errors. Coincidences. Over time, the story faded. New threats emerged. New technologies captured attention. And the world moved on. But the weapon never stopped existing. It remained where it was created. Silent. Stable. Waiting. Decades later, interest resurfaced. Not from governments, but from analysts. Researchers who noticed patterns that shouldn't align. Moments where the data bent just slightly. Enough to raise questions. Files were requested. Access was denied. Inquiries were redirected. Some researchers were warned off. Others simply disappeared from the conversation. Because acknowledging the weapon meant accepting something far more unsettling. That there are technologies humanity cannot uninvent. Ideas that, once realized, cannot be safely used. Only hidden. The lost weapon was never about destruction. It was about control. Not over enemies, but over reality itself. And reality proved unwilling to be governed. Today, the site still exists.
disguised,
monitored, ignored by maps and memory alike. The weapon remains contained, not because it was defeated, but because it was respected,
feared,
understood too late. History remembers wars. It remembers bombs. It remembers victories and defeats. But it forgets the weapons that were too powerful to use. Because some truths are safer in silence, and some creations are never meant to be found again. Then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes the world can be better. Because the ideas that change history only survive when people choose to remember them. Thank you for watching.